So I talked about in the previous video some of the strategies that we're going to talk about. So maintaining a level workforce is one of the ways that you can create your aggregate plan. So you can say, I'm going to have 50 employees and I'm going to have 50 employees every month and I'm not going to change that. Or you can say, I'm going to produce 110 items every month, and whatever I need to do to adjust my workforce to do that, then I'm going to do that. Or you can match the demand period by period, which means for each month you're going to produce whatever is demanded. Okay, or you can use a combination of any of those. So I'm going to talk about some of the strategies. So level capacity strategy is when you maintain a steady rate of regular time output while meeting variations in demand by a combination of options. So you're going to have a steady output. So let's say you've got 100 or whatever, you're going to keep a steady rate of output while meeting the variations in demand by a combination of options. So let's say one month your demand might be 50, the next month your demand might be 70, and then you might have a 60. Maybe each month you produce 60. And so some months you might have some inventory, some months you might have some part-time workers, some months you might subcontract, but you're going to maintain a steady rate of regular time output while meeting those. Okay. Chase demand strategy is when you match your capacity to the demand. So the planned output for a period is set at the expected demand for that period. So I'll show you that and how those two works. Capacity in the chase approach are adjusted to match the demand requirements over the planning horizon. The advantages are that the investment in inventory is low because you're utilizing that, but the trade-off is that your labor utilization is high. So there's pros and cons to every approach. There isn't a right answer. I know I've talked about this in the past, and I think that's an important thing to think about. The disadvantages is that the cost of adjusting output rates and or workforce levels, there's a cost to that, so you're spending a little bit more. On a level approach, the capacities are kept constant over the planning horizon, and the advantage is you have stable output rates and workforce, but you have greater inventory costs, perhaps increased overtime and idle time, and your resource utilization may vary over time. So there's positives and negatives to both. Some other techniques for aggregate planning, the actual process to do this is really determine the demand for each period, determine your capacities for each period, so make sure you can identify those. Identify company or departmental policies that are pertinent, determine unit costs, and develop alternative plans and costs, and then select the plan that best satisfies your objectives. There's also trial and error techniques, which consist of developing simple tables or graphs that enable planners to visually compare projected demand requirements with existing capacity, and then alternatives can be based on their total cost. Disadvantages, it doesn't necessarily result in an optimal aggregate plan. And then they show an example graph, your cumulative output and aggregate units over time in each of the periods. So this is where your surplus output, and this is your demand exceeds the output. So right now your cumulative demand is here, but your output is here, and then eventually you're going to use up your inventory and it's going to go above. So it kind of shows you what that might look like in a graph. And then there's also linear programming models, and this is really when it comes down to looking at simulations and things like that that you can kind of test and see how it will work, and there's plenty of those out there as well. So I'm going to give you an example and show you how you can do this on your own as well. So in this case, the costs are listed above. Forecast of 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 for a total of 1,800 over 6 months. So this is the period. Could be a quarter or whatever, but in this case, I think it's months. Your regular time is $2 per skateboard. Your overtime is $3 per skateboard. If you subcontract, it's going to cost you $6 per skateboard. And your inventory is $1 per skateboard per period, and back orders cost $5. So planners for a company that makes several models of skateboards are about to prepare an aggregate plan that will cover 6 periods. They want to evaluate a plan that calls for a steady rate of a regular output time, mainly using inventory to absorb the uneven demand, but allowing some backlog. Overtime and subcontracting are not used because they want steady output. They intend to start with 0 inventory on hand the first period. So here's what that chart looks like. So you can see right here the inventory starting is 0. Okay, your regular time with all your employees working is a steady rate of 300 units of skateboards per period, okay, for a total of 1,800. So you will get to 1,800 and match your forecast without any overtime or subcontract. But if you start tracking your inventory, this first month you start with 300, you have no inventory on hand, your forecast is 200, you're going to end with 100 skateboards left over. Your average inventory is 50. The reason the average is important is that's how you count your inventory costs. You just take an average, okay? No backlog. The next month you have 200 for your forecast, 300 regular overtime. Your output to forecast is 100. So if you look at this, your beginning inventory is 100. You have an ending inventory of 200, and the average is 150, okay? My output to forecast here is 0, so it's even. So I still have 200. I still have 200 on hand. The next period, my forecast is 400. And so now I have a negative output forecast. So I'm going to actually reduce my inventory. It's going to start at 200, end at 100, but my average is still 150. Okay, so that's what I'm getting charged for inventory. The next period, I have a 500 unit forecast, 300 with a negative 200. So now my ending inventory is 0. I'm dead on even, and my average is 50, but I have 100 backlogs, so I have 100 behind. Okay, so now I have a forecast of 200, but I have 100 behind, so I'm going to end up with 0 here. But I still have an output to forecast here of $100 in the positive, or 100 units in the positive, but it's going to impact my backlog, so I'm 0. Okay, so overall my average inventory, adding it up, is 600, and my average backlog was 100. Now if I look at the costs, those carry over. So my regular time is 600, that's even, but then you have to count your inventory. So how much did you get charged for inventory each month? None at the last month. And then your backlog, you didn't get charged until around 5, and that's just a simple multiplication of from the previous 2 slides earlier. And then you're just going to count your total. So this is your total cost. Okay. So aggregate planning happens in services, hospitals, airlines, and restaurants. 2 aggregate planning is used to allocate funds, staff, and supplies to meet the demand of patients. Airlines use aggregate planning to look at capacity decisions on how many planes, how many seats, things like that. And restaurants use aggregate planning in high volume businesses. So this is a little different because your inventory is perishable, so that's the only difference. But like I said in the beginning, this can be used in service industries as well. The resulting plan in services is a time-phase projection of service staff requirements. The demand for your service can be difficult to predict. Your capacity availability might be difficult as well. And labor flexibility can be an advantage in service industries, so that helps. Okay. And the last topic that I'm going to talk about for this is yield management. So that is when low demand happens, you can discount your prices. When high demands happen, you might have peak prices. Think about hotels, they do this all the time. Packer games, you have a 2-room night minimum and it increases the price. So this is all very related, okay? So I'm going to now come back out of this and go to Blackboard. And I want to show you a couple of things in Blackboard. One thing you should be able to see is a guided example for some questions related to questions in the book. They're not exact because the book changed, but you should be able to pull these up. It's a little video on how to fill out this form. Okay, so that is in Blackboard. The other thing that I have put in Blackboard, and I will move it because it's in the bottom, is this Excel template. This Excel template will help you with your chapter homework as well, because it looks like this. So it's got an aggregate planning sheet on it. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. And so this sheet goes out 6 periods. You can actually increase it, because if you pull these out, it goes all the way to 12. So you can carry this out if you need to. So just hide them. But this is This is the formulas already put in here. The cool thing is anything in the blue you can change based on your equation and then have it calculate for you. So this is a good tool to use when you're trying to work through some of your problems in the homework. You can test it out on here first and see how it works by adding and changing. So if I change this to, let's say, this is going to be 100, my whole thing shifts. So for each problem, you can just change your inputs that are in blue and it will change your cost. So let's say in this example, and I just want to walk you through something, this example was even Steven, right? So we're going to have the same output each time. So let's say I'm going to make another one like really high here. But let's say now we could do some part-time and some full-time, because I'm 300 short, so I can use some overtime maybe for a few extra units. So let's say maybe I did overtime to come out even. Now I can see what my cost would be using overtime to meet my demand versus no overtime, and maybe using subcontractors instead. So let's say maybe I didn't want to hold inventory. So maybe one of my goals is, I'm just going to come back up here if I can click on these. Okay. I'm just going to delete these out. And let's say I don't want to have any inventory. Okay, so now in this month I have an output discrepancy of 300, so maybe I only want to make 100 this round, so I'm going to lay off some workers, right? But now I have a little too much here, but the most I can do is 300, right? So now I need to maybe subcontract out 200, and maybe I need to have overtime for 100, and maybe I need some part-time workers to do another 100. Okay, so you can see now, look at how much more that's costing. You can actually determine, what that cost is going to be if you hire part-time workers to help with the fluctuation instead of using maybe a steadier output rate and hiring people over time to work all year round. So these are really good planning tools for hiring people, for understanding if you need to lay people off. So this would be like a minus for people because normally your output rate was 300. And I wonder if that'll do. So let's say if I do minus 200. Doesn't change my output. So I don't know how that works. That one doesn't, I think it switches in here, but yeah, you can play around with this and you can determine the cost. So there are a number of equations at the end of the chapter that you can certainly practice on. There's some examples of the solved problems in here where they also input it, and then you have the videos as well. So there's a lot to help you with that chapter homework, especially when it comes to the aggregate planning piece of it.